So next up, I'm delighted to welcome someone who has done tireless work on reforms to lift people out of poverty. Here to tell us more about how reinvested Pentagon money could dramatically help the lives of individuals, I want to welcome the Director of Public Policy at the Coalition for Human Needs, Sister Richelle Friedman.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and to all who organized this event, to the members of Congress who are leading this great effort to cut the Pentagon, to Reverend Barber, whose life's work is about shedding light on the need for greater economic and racial justice, and to all of you who are joining us tonight. The moral fabric of a nation is determined by how well it provides for the poor. The federal budget is a moral document. To become a just society, certain principles must underlie how we allocate our federal resources. The common good demands the right of all to have their basic human needs met. The health pandemic we are experiencing lays bare for all to see the deep economic and racial disparities ingrained in our system. Today, in this wealthy nation, there are 140 million poor and low-income people. This is not by accident. At the same time, spending for the Pentagon continues to increase practically unquestioned. Funding for human needs programs is eroding. For 10 years, my organization, the Coalition on Human Needs, has tracked nearly 200 programs vitally important to low-income people, programs that provide health care, housing, job training and education, nutrition, childcare, and other social services. Of those programs, we find that nearly 2/3 are funded at a level lower this year than in 2010. Is this the mark of a moral society? Federal assistance makes a difference. During the current pandemic, unemployment insurance, the cash stimulus payments, SNAP benefits, a moratorium on evictions, and loans to small businesses have thus far contributed to preventing poverty from rising to the rate initially predicted. Still, many families are suffering hardships, and much of the aid is scheduled to expire at the end of July. And undocumented immigrants have been excluded altogether from receiving aid. Our national security is about more than protecting ourselves from outside perpetrators. Our national security depends on improving the lives of poor communities that have been neglected and abandoned for a long time. Will Congress and the President act to reprioritize the needs of poor communities, both in the immediate and in the long term? Prior to the pandemic, unemployment was disproportionately highest in racial minority households. Since mid-March, someone lost income from work in 55% of Latinx households, in 53% of Black households, and in 50% of Asian households. Unemployment insurance and cash assistance is desperately needed. Prior to the pandemic, 17% of all children lived in households that lacked access to adequate food. In the early weeks of the pandemic, 1 in 5 adults in the United States didn't have enough food to eat. The lack of food is placing the hardest burdens on racial minorities and frontline workers whose jobs tend to be low paying. Prior to the pandemic, only 1 in 4 households poor enough to be eligible for federal housing assistance received it. The National Low Income Housing Coalition estimates that $100 billion in emergency rental assistance is needed right now to prevent further evictions and homelessness. More than 1/3 of American children, 23 million, do not receive the full $2,000 value of the child tax credit. Shamefully, almost 1 in 5 Black children receive nothing at all through the child tax credit because their families are too poor to qualify for help. Making the full credit available to poor families would dramatically cut the poverty rate by 52% for Black children, 49% for Hispanic children, and 23% for Asian children. Congress must act, and must act with a sense of urgency to make these actions happen. Federal assistance is absolutely critical. What Franklin Roosevelt said 70 years ago still applies today. The test of our progress is not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much. It is whether we provide enough for those who have little. Will Congress and the President act? A moral society demands that they do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richelle. We're so happy to be working with you. And thanks to all of you who have stuck with us to the very end of this live stream, and to the more than 20 organizations who have cross-posted this live stream.